Niccolò Machiavelli is often seen as the master of power and strategy. In this video, we break down how he would outsmart everyone, using what we can call his 21 laws of power. These are not rules he literally wrote in one list, but ideas taken from his thinking in The Prince and his view of human behavior. Machiavelli believed that people act in self-interest, and power belongs to those who understand this clearly. He studied how leaders win influence, how they keep control, and how they avoid being removed by stronger rivals. If Machiavelli was alive today, he would not rely on strength alone. He would rely on perception, timing, and psychological control. He would read people before they speak. He would act when others hesitate. And he would never reveal his full intention too early. In this breakdown, we will turn his philosophy into simple, modern laws you can understand and apply in thinking, strategy, and decision-making. This is not about morality. It is about understanding power as a system. Once you see how it works, you start noticing it everywhere in politics, business, and relationships. Stay focused, because power always rewards awareness and patience over time. Don't forget to subscribe to stay connected with this knowledge. In Machiavelli's world, what people believe about you is more powerful than what you actually are. And this is the first rule anyone trying to outsmart others must understand. Power does not start with strength. It starts with perception. If people see you as strong, they will treat you as strong, even before you prove anything. Machiavelli would teach that humans judge with their eyes first and think later, which means appearance becomes a weapon. You do not need to be the most intelligent person in the room, but you must be seen as the most prepared. You do not need to be the richest, but you must look like someone who cannot be ignored. In every environment, people build assumptions quickly, and those assumptions become your advantage if you control them early. Machiavelli would not waste time correcting misunderstandings about himself unless they were dangerous. Instead, he would shape a version of himself that others respect or fear, depending on what is useful. He understood that reality is slow, but perception is instant. And in politics, business, or relationships, the one who controls the first impression controls the direction of the game. This law is not about lying for no reason. It is about choosing what others are allowed to see. If you reveal weakness too early, people will not wait to see your strength. They will act on what they think they know. That is why Machiavelli would carefully manage his image in every situation, speaking only when it adds value and staying silent when confusion benefits him. He would also understand that symbols matter more than explanations. The way you dress, the way you enter a room, the way you carry yourself, all send signals before you even speak. People trust signals more than truth because signals are easier to process. If you look like someone who is in control, others will adjust their behavior around you without questioning it. This creates invisible influence. Over time, this influence becomes real power because people start making decisions based on your perceived position, not your actual one. Machiavelli would never allow his opponents to fully understand his limits, because once your limits are known, you can be pushed. Instead, he would keep a layer of uncertainty around himself so people are never fully sure what he is capable of. That uncertainty creates caution, and caution creates respect. In this law, the goal is simple. Manage how you are seen so effectively that others begin to act in your favor before you even make a move. Machiavelli would teach that loyalty is never absolute, especially when power, opportunity, and self-interest are involved. And any man who understands this early gains a serious advantage in life. People do not stay loyal out of obligation alone. They stay loyal when it benefits them, when they respect your strength, or when they fear losing what they gain from you. This means loyalty is not something you fully trust, it is something you manage. Machiavelli would not build relationships assuming permanence. Instead, he would build systems of advantage where people choose to stay aligned with him because leaving costs more than staying. For men trying to understand this law, it is not about becoming paranoid, it is about becoming realistic. You can respect people, You can value relationships, but you must never depend on someone as your only pillar of support. Machiavelli would always maintain multiple connections, multiple alliances, and multiple paths forward so that no single person could control his outcome. This is where many men make mistakes in life. They put all their trust, effort, or emotional stability into one person, one friend group, or one opportunity. And when that support shifts, everything collapses. Machiavelli would see this as weakness in structure, not just emotion. In his view, strength is redundancy, meaning you always have backup options in case one fails. Controlled loyalty means you give people reasons to stay without giving them full power over you. You share value, but not dependence. You show respect, but not submission. You allow trust to grow, but you never let it become blind. Machiavelli would also understand that loyalty can be influenced through reward and consequence. People stay loyal where they feel recognized, useful, and protected, but they also stay where they sense there is consequence for betrayal. This is not about cruelty, but about balance. A man who is too soft becomes replaceable, and a man who is too harsh becomes isolated. Controlled loyalty sits in the middle, where respect is earned and boundaries are clear. He would also advise that emotional attachment should never override strategic awareness. Just because someone has been with you for a long time does not mean they will stay when conditions change. Men who ignore this often get blindsided. Machiavelli would instead observe patterns, not promises. He would watch how people behave when pressure increases, not just when things are easy. Because loyalty is truly tested in difficulty, not comfort. The goal of this law is not to distrust everyone, but to understand that stability comes from structure, not feelings. When a man builds his life so that no single loss can destroy him, he becomes difficult to control and even harder to break. That is controlled loyalty. Machiavelli would understand that silence is not weakness, it is control, and in many cases, it is more powerful than any argument you can make. Most men lose influence not because they lack intelligence, but because they speak too much and reveal too early. When you talk constantly, you expose your intentions, your emotions, and your position. Machiavelli would see this as giving away your strategy before the game even begins. Strategic silence means you choose when to speak, what to reveal, and what to permanently keep hidden. It is not about being quiet all the time. It is about being intentional with your words. A man who speaks less than necessary naturally gains attention because people start paying more attention to what he says when he finally speaks. Silence creates space for observation. While others are busy talking, reacting, and exposing themselves, the silent man is watching patterns, reading behavior, and collecting information. Machiavelli would value information over expression because information leads to control, while expression often leads to vulnerability. Many men make the mistake of trying to prove themselves through constant explanation, but in reality, explanation weakens authority. When you feel the need to explain everything, you are already being questioned, and Machiavelli would avoid that position completely. Instead, he would let outcomes speak for him. If his actions are strong, there is no need for excessive words. Strategic silence also creates psychological pressure. When you do not immediately respond, people begin to wonder what you are thinking. That uncertainty gives you influence because the mind naturally tries to fill gaps. Machiavelli would use this gap to his advantage, allowing others to overthink while he stays calm and unreadable. This makes him harder to manipulate because you cannot predict someone who does not reveal their internal state easily. Men who master silence also avoid unnecessary conflict. Many battles are lost before they begin because someone reacts emotionally instead of waiting. Machiavelli would delay reaction until clarity is achieved. He would never let urgency force him into poor decisions. In modern life, this means not replying instantly when emotional, not revealing plans too early, and not responding to every challenge immediately. Silence also builds authority in groups. The person who speaks less but with precision often becomes the most respected voice in the room. People begin to assume that when he speaks, it matters. That assumption is power on its own. Machiavelli would also understand that silence protects strategy. The more people know about your plans, the easier it is for them to interfere. So he would reveal only what is necessary for cooperation, never what is critical for success. In this law, silence is not absence, it is strategy. It is the discipline of holding information, controlling reaction, and allowing others to expose themselves while you remain stable and unreadable. A man who masters this becomes difficult to influence, difficult to predict, and impossible to rush. Machiavelli would teach that timing is not just important in power, it is everything. Because the same action done at the wrong moment becomes weakness, while a delayed action done at the right moment becomes dominance. In relationships, this becomes even clearer, because imagine a man who reacts immediately every time his partner changes mood, withdraws attention, or creates emotional distance. He starts chasing, explaining, over-texting, or trying to fix everything instantly, and in doing so, he loses control of his position. Machiavelli would see this as acting without timing, which means acting under pressure instead of acting with strategy. Now imagine another man in the same situation who observes first, stays calm, and does not rush to respond emotionally. His partner expects immediate reaction, but instead she meets composure. That pause changes everything. It creates uncertainty, and uncertainty shifts attention. Calculated timing means you never let emotion dictate speed. You choose when to engage and when to hold back. Machiavelli would say that power is often lost not in action itself, but in the speed of reaction. In relationships, people often think constant availability equals value, but over-availability removes tension, and without tension, attraction weakens. A man who understands timing knows when to give attention and when to withdraw it slightly to restore balance. This is not manipulation for harm. It is understanding human psychology at its core. People value what feels earned, not what feels automatic. Machiavelli would also apply timing when resolving conflict. If a man responds immediately in anger during an argument, he gives control to emotion. But if he waits, processes, and responds when clarity returns, his words carry more weight and less regret. Timing also applies to opportunities within relationships. There are moments when speaking up, setting boundaries, or expressing intention has maximum impact, and other moments when doing so weakens your position. Machiavelli would always wait for the moment where his action produces the highest influence with the least resistance. For example, if someone in a relationship is testing limits or creating distance, reacting instantly with fear or desperation signals loss of control, but responding calmly and at the right moment signals stability, which is far more powerful. In his view, rushing is a sign of dependence, while patience is a sign of control. He would observe emotional cycles instead of reacting to each wave. Because people do not stay in one emotional state, they shift, and the man who understands these shifts can position himself advantageously without forcing outcomes. Calculated timing is also about knowing when not to speak, when not to chase, and when to let silence do the work of pressure. In relationships, this creates respect because it shows that your decisions are not controlled by impulse. Machiavelli would ultimately see timing as the difference between a man who reacts to life and a man who directs it. The first is always struggling to catch up. The second is always already ahead. Machiavelli would say the highest form of power is not the one that is seen, but the one that is felt without being recognized. Because visible control always attracts resistance, while invisible control shapes outcomes quietly. In relationships, this becomes very clear when you look at the difference between a man who tries to control everything directly and a man who influences everything without needing to force anything. The first man constantly checks, questions, and demands explanations, trying to hold power through pressure. But the more he forces control, the more tension he creates, and the more the other person feels the need to resist. Machiavelli would see this as weak control because it is obvious and therefore easy to fight against. Invisible control works differently. Imagine a man in a relationship who does not constantly demand attention or obedience, but instead builds a strong emotional frame where his presence naturally sets the tone. He does not need to tell his partner what to do all the time, because his consistency, confidence, and calm behavior influence her decisions without direct instruction. She adjusts her behavior not because she is forced, but because she respects the stability he brings. That is invisible control. Machiavelli would explain that true influence is when people believe the decision was theirs, even though your behavior guided them there. In relationships, this means creating emotional leadership without aggression. For example, if a man reacts emotionally to every small issue, he becomes predictable and easy to influence. But if he stays composed, chooses his responses carefully, and does not overreact, he creates an environment where his partner becomes more mindful of her actions, not because she is afraid, but because she respects his standard. Invisible control is also about emotional independence. A man who depends heavily on validation loses influence because his emotional state becomes readable and therefore controllable. But a man who is grounded does not shift easily based on external behavior, which makes him harder to manipulate. Machiavelli would also emphasize that people follow stability, not chaos. In a relationship, if one person is constantly reacting, chasing, or over-explaining, they are not leading the emotional direction of the relationship. But if one person remains steady, they become the reference point for balance. Over time, the other person starts to align with that stability naturally. This is control without force. It is influence without exposure. Machiavelli would also warn that visible dominance often creates rebellion, especially in close relationships, because nobody wants to feel dominated openly. But invisible control avoids this by making influence feel like cooperation. The partner feels free, but their choices are still shaped by your emotional framework. This is the most advanced form of power because it cannot easily be challenged. You cannot fight what you do not see clearly. In the end, Machiavelli would see invisible control as the peak of mastery, where a man no longer needs to prove authority, because his presence alone quietly organizes the behavior of those around him, especially in relationships where emotions usually override logic. In Machiavelli's view, power is not about force, but about understanding human behavior at its deepest level. The 21 laws we explored all point to one truth. People respond to perception, timing, silence, loyalty management, and invisible influence. In relationships, business, or life, the man who stays calm, observant, and intentional will always have the advantage over the man who reacts emotionally. Machiavelli would not encourage chaos, but control through awareness. The real lesson is simple. When you understand how people think, you stop being easily controlled, and you start moving with strategy instead of impulse.